Let's go ahead and get into it.
The Joe Rogan experience.
So with things like funding the Ukraine war with Russia, please explain to people what that means and why we're sending so much money over to Ukraine.
So let's start with that. Let's start with the military industrial complex.
Okay.
What is it? Who is it? It is these massive defense corporations who make all these different weapon systems, from the smallest to the most powerful nuclear weapons and missiles. When we are at war, they make a lot of money. When politicians, even if we're not at war, but are threatening that we may go to war, they make a lot of money. And these decisions are not made within the context of, hey, what does our military actually need? What do we need to ensure that our military is ready to defend our country and our national security interests? It is very often what members of Congress are advocating for, even more than the military is asking for sometimes, because of those cozy relationships with the military industrial complex, with these massive defense contractors and their lobbyists. So there's a direct correlation as the money is changing hands there.
Let's talk about that piece for just a second. This is why it is so crucial that you have these protests at places like Lockheed Martin, at Raytheon, and there have been protests at Raytheon this year, a couple of them here in Massachusetts. This is why this is so crucial, because there is money to be made here. If it were not for the weapon contractors, if it wasn't for them, would they be as invested? Would the United States government be as invested in keeping this going? Because when you see these articles that tell you, yeah, they're sending this 40 billion package, and in this package, about 10 or 15 million is for weapons. Where do you think those weapons are coming from? So I think it's important to mention that there is money to be made. And I've said this multiple times before. The United States government, they usually don't get their hands into something unless there's money or resources involved. So it is critical that you do have these protests at Lockheed Martin, at Raytheon, at Northrop Grumman. Those are just a few of the ones that I know about. Let's go on.
The problem is not with the Democratic Party, the Republican Party on this issue. When you see this so much divisiveness on tons of other issues facing our country, everything from infrastructure to education, all these other things, you see like, oh my gosh, Democrats and Republicans can't agree on anything. This issue of putting our country in a continual state of war is supported by leaders in both parties and the majority of people in both parties. And it's directly tied to the military industrial complex's influence and tied to people who, want to act and look tough, but aren't asking the most important questions like, okay, if we do this, will this help the American people or hurt the American people? If we vote to, send these billions of dollars to Ukraine, is that strengthening our national security or undermining it? You'll hear a lot of rhetoric, especially recently, saying, hey, if we've got to send all this money to Ukraine, otherwise Russia's going to come and attack us here. Otherwise, our national security will be undermined. So they say all these things to foment fear in people's minds, but they're not rooted in reality.
So I do want to chime in here and just say, so again, where's the lie? Now, I don't agree with Tulsi Gabbard on multiple issues, but she is correct about this one. And I will add, you notice that she said, it doesn't matter if it's the Democratic Party or if it's the Republican Party. When it comes to this particular issue, they agree. when it comes to supporting the military industrial complex, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have bipartisanship easily. And this is why when you see progressive, like the squad members that went in through the Democratic Party into Congress, they vote along with a lot of this legislation. They voted along to send all this money to Ukraine. The party supports it. So we need to talk about that more. We need to talk about the fact that when it comes to war, they have no problem having bipartisanship when it comes to the MIC. Now, granted, with this one in particular, there have been some Republicans that have been against the funding, that have been against it. But in reference to the parties, for the most part, they have no problem shaking hands. Go ahead and hit that like button, guys. Just wanted to remind you to do that. Let's go.
So what we're seeing play out now is essentially a proxy war. U.S. is engaging in a proxy war with Russia, using Ukraine as their military. So the U.S. and some European countries, predominantly the U.S., though, are providing billions of dollars in funding, weapon systems, and so forth, and essentially waging this war using the Ukrainian military and people as their chess pieces in this geopolitical chess game. The ultimate objective being regime change with Russia. And you can see years before, obviously, Russia's invasion in Ukraine, this anti-Russia sentiment has been building up by the permanent Washington establishment and laying the groundwork. And this was the opportunity that they saw. It's put us in the most dangerous position we, the American people, and the world has ever been in.
Okay, that's well said. And it's not just Russia either. There's been that same type of sentiment that the U.S. government has been building up towards China as well. That same type of fear mongering and resentment towards another nation. And in reference to Russia, I will say, I've seen this my whole life. Even when I was a kid, there was a lot of fear mongering towards Russia. And it wasn't just from the US government. It also came from entertainment. It came from Hollywood, right? How many of you are Rocky fans? I've seen all the Rocky movies. Rocky IV. Look at the way they portrayed Russia in Rocky IV. Now, granted, the character fighting against Rocky was an ass, but still, look at the way that Russia is depicted in Hollywood. Every time they talk about Russia, it's always like this cold, like place. They make it appear to be, it's always snowing for whatever reason. Have you noticed this? Every time they show Russia, Breaking Bad did the same thing. Or was that Breaking Bad? No, Breaking Bad did that with New Hampshire. Someone else did that recently. It was a movie I was watching. Oh, well. But every time they show or depict Russia, it's always snowing and cold. Arrow did that on Netflix. They make it seem like everybody there is just so cold and mean. And so Hollywood's complicit in this too. And that's on purpose, because they want you to have that same perception of Russia. You see how the government and Hollywood work hand in hand together, and also the mainstream media. This is where some of those stereotypes come from. Hollywood.
In that a nuclear war could break out in a week, in 30 days. We are staring over the precipice of that nuclear brink now more than ever before. We're hearing language coming from Putin, from Medvedev, from different Russian nationalist leaders saying, no, Putin, you should go and use those nuclear weapons, whether they're the tactical nukes or the strategic nukes, doesn't matter. There is no way to win this. That would spark a nuclear war. It would spark World War III. And the result of that is destruction of the world. It is destruction of the world as we know it. And, you know, I hate to paint such a bleak picture, but people need to know that this is the reality that we're facing, that our leaders have pushed us and led us to this brink of nuclear war. They have their own bunkers and ways to protect themselves. There is no shelter for the American people.
And I mentioned this last night. This is something that I was saying, like, look at the position that they put the American people in. This is so dangerous and it's scary. But here we are, right? If it comes to that point, who is going to be protected? The politicians in DC, they'll be protected. If you remember the protest that happened last January, I have to be careful how I talk about that on here. Remember, they had places they could go to. The politicians had these little secret passages and places where they can hide and be safe. We don't have that. They'll be protected. The American people won't. The billionaires will be protected. Maybe some of the millionaires, but the rest of us, we won't. So I'm glad that she mentioned that.
I think it was last time I was here, I talked to you about the nuclear scare that we had in Hawaii and how, this message went out to everybody saying, hey, missile incoming, seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill. What everybody found out immediately is there is no shelter. There is no shelter. There's no place to go. There's no place where you can take your loved ones and your kids to be protected, not only from the blast, but the fallout and the lack of food and water and everything else that comes after. New York City recently put out a PSA. I don't know if you saw it, but it is literally a video ad that they put out saying, hey, here's what you do in the event of a nuclear explosion. Why are they putting this out now? Because of where we are as a country. The problem is, as it shows in this video, their advice to the people of New York City is get inside, and stay tuned. That's it.
Stay tuned to what?
That's right. There is I saw that ad as well. And I do remember when that happened in Hawaii. And with Hawaii, it's even more of a scarier situation because Hawaii is an island. Where are you going to run to? Where are you going to go? You're on an island. There's nowhere for you to go. Where are you going to go? Right? So I think that she has a point. I saw that ad about New York City, what to do, where to go if this happens. Ain't nowhere for you to go. That ad was so ridiculous. Don't have open windows, as if that's going to protect you from a nuclear blast if you close the window. This is the reality, guys, that we have to come to grips with. What would you do? Where would we go?
The radio, I guess.
I mean, what is even going to be available?
That's my point.
Yeah,
that is exactly my point. There will be no power. There will be no infrastructure. There will be no, you see what's happening in Florida right now with the recovery efforts after this hurricane just swept through and demolished it. You think about that, multiply that by 50,000 times. The devastation is what we would see, but we wouldn't have FEMA. We wouldn't have these first responders who are able to actually go out and help people. And the worst thing I said when I watched that PSA, get inside, stay tuned. At the end, I'm assuming as an actor they hired to do this, she looks in the camera and she's like, you got this, New York. Like, what in the world? These people are creating this false sense of security for the American people, saying like, oh yeah, take shelter, but there is no shelter.
We should watch that because it's so crazy.
It is insane.
Let's watch that because it's
So there's been a nuclear attack. Don't ask me how or why, just know that the big one has hit. Okay, so what do? There are 3 important steps that I want you to remember.
Big
Step
smile.
1, get inside fast. You, your friends, your family, get inside. And no, staying in the car is not an option. You need to get into a building and move away from the windows.
Look at her smiles.
I know.
Big smile.
Step 2, stay inside. Shut all doors and windows. Have a basement? Head there. If you don't have one, get as far into the middle of the building as possible. If you were outside after the blast, get clean immediately. Remove and bag all outer clothing to keep radioactive dust or ash away from your body. Step 3, stay tuned. Follow media for more information. Don't forget to sign up for Notify NYC for official alerts and updates. And don't go outside until officials say it's safe. All right, you've got this.
You don't got shit.
So that part where she says, don't go outside until the officials say it's safe. Would the officials be alive? Like what? I can't believe they made this ad. Oh boy.
Officials, like who? Rashida Tlaib? She's going to tell you?
Right.
Like, who's the officials? People that they elected? Who's going to tell you it's okay to go outside during a nuclear blast in the United States, something that's never happened ever, and that we're completely woefully unprepared for?
Exactly.
You got this. You got this. She's so pretty, though. With her big smile.
She's got a nice smile.
She's got a great smile. That's probably why they hired her. That is a crazy thing to put out there. First of all, because like, what is it? What's the purpose of that? Is that to reassure people? Like, what is the purpose of that?
Yeah.
It's not to inform people, because none of what she said makes any sense.
No.
Oh, get in the middle of the room?
Right.
Oh, that's okay.
Right.
The outside's not good?
Just stay away from the window.
The middle's not going to be.
Because the radiation is not.
Just stays put.
Yeah.
The radiation's, it's kind of like a fog machine.
Yeah.
You know, it just doesn't get inside. Like what?
I was in, I think it was after my second deployment. When I came back from the Middle East, I went on a trip and did some travel through Eastern Europe and went and actually visited Chernobyl. And it was astonishing to me even decades after that happened, because I was curious. I'd heard about it and it's like, okay. Went on this little bus and went out there. They gave us these radiation monitors, these handheld radiation monitors, so that wherever we were, you know, you could kind of test and see where the radiation still existed. They're like, oh, you're going to see apple trees and things like that. Don't eat any of the fruit because it's contaminated. It is still contaminated decades later. Walking through the middle of the town, I know everyone's seen the pictures, and obviously now with that Chernobyl series, I think that Netflix did, more and more people know the story. But, you know, walking through like the school and the classrooms where the desks and the books and the kids' shoes and the deflated basketballs, everything is still there in the way that it was when people fled and had to evacuate when that nuclear plant melted down. It was so eerie walking through there. You could almost kind of feel the heaviness of what happened there. And then as we were leaving after we left and were crossing back into Ukraine, we had to go through these, like, before we got on the bus, we had to go through these radiation, kind of like the thing you walk through in TSA, except it tests for radiation to make sure you're not actually bringing any contaminants with you back into society. All of that is to say, like, this is what we're talking about. So you see that kind of video and you see how completely out of touch it is with the reality of what could happen in the event of a nuclear attack. And the fact that, you know, Russia's got over 6,000 nuclear warheads. The United States has over 5,000 nuclear warheads, both countries making up 90% of the total number of nuclear warheads that exist in the world. And literally it would just take the flick of a match to spark this war off. And that's where, say, okay, well, you hear President Biden say, well, this is Putin's war. This is Putin's fault. it's Putin who's the one who's solely responsible. Well, the United States and some of these European NATO countries are fueling this war and need to provide the leadership to bring about a negotiated outcome. That is exactly what needs to happen here to prevent the destruction of the planet.
We need to call for peace. We really need to call for peace. Because if, and excuse my language, but if shit pops off, does it really matter whose war it is if everyone's dead? This is the part that that's what needs to be pushed. That's what we should be pushing right now. Instead of pointing fingers and blaming, it's Ukraine, it's Russia, it's whoever. We're not innocent. The United States government isn't innocent. We're complicit in this too. But I just don't understand it. And then you have people, these body bots or whatever you want to call them on Twitter, and they're just like, yeah, we need Ukraine to win. Da, da, da. We should be calling for peace. I'm not cheering for either side. I want to make that very clear. I want it to stop. I just don't think people understand like where we're headed. Now that video is a little bit longer that you can see here as well. But I think, Tulsi's spot on there. And I also think that you should watch the entire interview on Joe Rogan's on Spotify where you can hear the whole thing because they talked about other things as well. Joe Rogan doesn't put his full interviews on YouTube anymore. There's just like these 15-minute or 14-minute clips that he'll put on. So if you want to hear everything else that they discuss, go towards Spotify.